Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is securing data access. Speaking today will be Jared Correa. Jared is the Assistant Director and Senior Law Practice Advisor for LOMAP, the Law Office Management Assistance Program in Massachusetts. Before joining LOMAP, Jared managed CLE publications and the CaseMaker research engine for the Massachusetts Bar Association. He has been a practicing lawyer in small firms where he mostly focused on personal injury, real estate, and disability law. Jared is a regular contributor to local and national legal publications, including Attorney at Work, where you can find his monthly column entitled Managing. Jared is the author of the American Bar Association publication Twitter in 1 Hour for Lawyers. He is the co-host of the podcast The Legal Toolkit on Legal Talk Network and is featured on a quarterly podcast at Solo Practice University. Jared also presented at ABA Tech Show 2013 on remote access and social media marketing. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll now begin the webinar.
Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks to the Legal Technology Resource Center and the ABA for having me on. Thanks to Abacus Solutions for asking me to present this webinar. It's my pleasure, and thanks to all you for listening. So today we're going to talk about securing access in the law firm environment. And what I mean by that is really, how do you keep your data secure? All that information that you have that you're storing for your clients. Probably one of the largest concerns that lawyers and law firms have is gaps in technology security. Some of those they know about and don't necessarily have appropriate solutions for. Some of those they don't know about, and that's even scarier. So I'm going to try to cover both instances today and try to alert you to some security gaps that you may not be aware of, and also try to discuss some practical, potentially inexpensive solutions for curing those. I think one of the biggest challenges for lawyers practicing in 2015, especially lawyers in small firms, is managing all the data. Every year, every day it seems, lawyers are faced with challenges respecting the amount of data they receive. It's information overload constantly. Got more and more different types of data that you're storing for clients. And the challenge is that from an ethical construct, and really from a state law construct now, and we'll talk about that, lawyers are the stewards of their clients' files. So not only do they have to maintain those files for business purposes so that they can administer them, to them effectively, they also have to secure that data in very specific ways, and we'll talk about that. The nightmare scenario is someone coming in and accessing your data or your client's data and using it for a deleterious purpose. And lawyers stay up at night worrying about this. There are things you can do to defend yourself, but you can never be 100% certain to avoid a breach. And that's one of the things that lawyers have to realize is this is not you will never allow a breach of your data. This is you will do your best job to avoid that scenario. And the case law, the ethics rules, the statutes out there really say that you have to do a reasonable job of securing your data. Let's parse that out and talk about what that means. With respect to unauthorized access, there are sort of two scenarios that you're concerned about, and some of them are not even all that frightening from the bad actor's point of view. I mean, the concern is always hackers, but inadvertent access from people who actually work for you can be dangerous as well, and we'll talk about that. But if you're worried about people accessing internal data, internal to your law firm, there are going to be three things that you want to look at from the internal perspective. So passwords are the gold standard for data protection. At a very basic level, if you're using cloud-based software, there's going to be a password access to the information. Likely there's going to be a password access for gaining entry into the system, whatever system you use. Case management system, accounting system, whatever product lines you utilize in your office, somebody has to have a password to get through. So from the standpoint of what do you and your employees have to do to better secure your data, well, the first step is choosing strong passwords. The stronger the password, the more difficult it's going to be to crack. even using things like brute force attacks, where hackers are going to be running a number of different combinations just to see if they can figure out how to get into your system. So you don't want to be choosing passwords that are simplistic, like guest is out, password is out, 123 is out, right? The other thing that people don't necessarily think about is that you don't want to include passwords with information that is potentially findable online. So that could be something like your dog's name, right? If you've got a law firm bio up that has information about your dog and what your dog's name is, well, if I'm a hacker, that's going to be one of the first things I'm going to try to use to get into your systems. That or some combination that includes the name of your pet. And this is how Jessica Alba's iPhone was hacked. Somebody found out the name of her pet, and that was her password on her iPhone. It's difficult to do from a management sense as well, because as an attorney who's conscious about technology and data security, you probably have an idea that you need a secure password of some type. Now, the challenge is reiterating that to your employees and making sure that those passwords don't get too stale. The problem becomes if you have people working at a place for a long period of time, say 2 to 3 years, they're using passwords. Those passwords never get changed. They may swap passwords with other employees, or the secretary who's out that day may swap passwords with the secretary who's in because they're the only one who has access to a certain platform. That happens in law firms, right? You buy one account for like QuickBooks, and everybody shares the password. Well, that sharing of passwords, the fact that the password remains the same for a longer period of time, it's going to be easier to hack those passwords. So you want to make sure that you have a system in place at your firm where you're able to allow people to choose effective passwords, secure passwords, more secure passwords, and then a system whereby they're going to be forced to change those passwords from time to time. So internally, when you've gotten your password access and you're in the system, the challenge becomes how do you appropriately screen people? So the issue here is not everybody who works at your firm necessarily needs to have access to every client file, right? There may be people who are on the secretarial staff who only work in the real estate side of the firm, and you may have a number of personal injury cases, but they don't necessarily need access to that information, and there's no good reason to give them that access. Part of the thrust of the data privacy laws, the confidentiality requirements that attorneys must face up to is that you don't necessarily need to go about giving access to people who don't need it. You want to sort of treat access from a strict frame of mind. You only want to give access to the people who really need it, because then you're not unnecessarily exposing information, exposing data. So from the attorney standpoint, you want to be able to appropriately screen attorneys from certain cases. Now, they're not looking to hack your data necessarily, but what may happen is they may be in a case that they are conflicted out of. And if you don't have a way to screen those attorneys from those cases, that's potentially problematic for you. You may end up conflicting yourself out of a case that could potentially be very valuable. So from the standpoint of access to persons who are supposed to have access to systems generally, but who are not supposed to have access to products, to clients or cases, then you want to figure out an appropriate way to screen them. Now, part of this relates to how you use vendors and how you vet vendors. If you've got a case management system, for example, that you're using, you want to know what the defaults are. You want to know how to screen someone, how to limit their access if you have to. And if you're in a small firm, you don't necessarily want employees, including associates, having access to personnel information. So that doesn't necessarily conflict you out of a case, but you want to be able to screen folks effectively out of those areas. So understand how your products work. Most vendors, especially vendors who produce relationship databases, so databases that connect clients and information about clients and give attorneys and employees access to that information, they have a sense that screening is going to be required, but each of them do it in a different way. So you want to make sure that you understand what the screening protocol is. From the standpoint of choosing vendors that you use to have access to your client files, which is really what you're giving them, you want to be certain that you're vetting those vendors appropriately. So there are about 25 states that have put out ethics opinions on using cloud-based vendors. And basically the standard, which is coalescing into a national standard, is one of reasonableness. So you have to appropriately vet and you have to reasonably maintain data in a secure way through those systems. But the first step is vetting providers. So you want to kind of figure out what are the security audits looking like for that provider. What kind of encryption do they use and when? What do they give you for screening tools? You want to know that going in, because if you're giving a vendor access to your client data, you want to make sure that you understand the terms of service, the privacy agreements, and the tools that you can use to better secure your client's data using that system. Most reputable providers will have answers to those questions for you. So let's talk a little bit about how to stop unauthorized access from people outside of the firm. So those bad actors who want to hack into your information and use it for some purpose, financial, illegal, otherwise. So I talked about the importance of passwords before and how those are really effective from an internal standpoint, especially in a small office. The other thing you can add to a password is factors of authentication. And so what I mean by that is you need a second key to get into a system. And the easiest example is with email. So if you have a password for an email and you've turned on a second factor of authentication, what you need to be doing is then looking to see whether you're going to have access based on text or some other information that you get on another device. So the most common way to add a factor of authentication is you have your password, plus you have a text message that you get with a certain numerical code. And you turn this on any of your systems, you'll see how it works. So you enter your password, and then you've got to enter that code on your phone to gain access. Now, the theory behind this is that even if a hacker may have access to your system and has gotten through on your password, they're unlikely to also have your smartphone at the same time. And that's the only way they're going to be able to get in. So if you get that text message notification for a code and you're not the one who's doing it, that's a red flag. But there are a number of different ways to do this. I mean, there is technology out there where you can use thumbprints or fingerprints as a second factor of authentication. That's probably where we're headed on this, but for right now, the most common way to do it is a password plus a text message code that you receive. And if you set that up, you're far more secure than if you use just a password. And that deters outside actors from trying to hack into your databases. Encryption is also a great way to keep people out that you don't want to have access to your information. Encryption is a bugaboo for a lot of attorneys. They don't really understand how it works and what products they can use. But it's fairly straightforward. Encryption just scrambles the information you have in a document, an electronic document, and adds a password. So you have to have that password or that key to gain access to the document. Otherwise, it's going to look like scrambled information. A lot of providers will have built-in encryption, which you can utilize, but there are a number of other different ways that you can encrypt your services that you use, as well as individual documents. And this is a process question to a large extent. If you have a lot of documents that you need to encrypt, then you want to have a process in place, or you want to buy into a system that's going to allow you to do that on a large scale. If you're just encrypting a document here and there, you can probably use built-in protocols on Microsoft Word, Adobe Acrobat, or a number of other programs to secure data. There's often a security button on any of those systems, and you just add encryption from there. And it's really straightforward. You choose a password, you resave the document, and it's encrypted. And then you can email that document to a client, call them up, give them the password, and then they'll be able to access the document on the other side. Now, if you do this a lot, and you need to encrypt like 100, 150 documents a month, it probably doesn't make sense to do it on a one-off basis. So you could use systems that will allow you to encrypt documents through a process. And the easiest way to do that is to use email encryption systems. So most of the major email providers will have an encryption system of some kind that can be built onto what they're doing. It's available in Gmail. It's available in Outlook. There are products like Reflexion is one. ZixCorp is another, and they provide email encryption services. So what you do in that case is you type in to the email somewhere, encrypt or whatever code you want, and it'll automatically encrypt the email and all the attachments, and that'll go to a secure inbox. Because the problem with email is that it's going to go through a number of different servers, and you may not know what every one of those servers are. What an encrypted email service does is it takes the email out of the inbox, drops it directly into a secure inbox where your client or your referral source or another attorney can pick it up. So if you're doing a lot of encryption, that's a good way to do it. And services like that are not tremendously expensive. They cost like $7, $8 a month. We'll talk about encrypting devices as we move down here, but you can do that as well. So one of the challenges of the law firm is this bring your own device culture that now exists. And this is especially an issue at law firms where there's more and different kinds of data to secure. And it needs to be kept more securely than it does in other environments, non-professional environments. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, if they're allowing staff or if they themselves are bringing in different devices to access their information, and information is available through those devices, or especially when it's saved on those devices, you need to be clear about how that data is going to be secured. So if you're allowing staff persons to bring in their own smartphones and access data, tablets, laptops, you want to make sure that those devices are all encrypted. And you can encrypt any device. It's just going to be a different protocol for different devices. You may also look to make sure that various folders are encrypted, certain documents are encrypted, just to make sure that if that device is lost, or somebody who's not supposed to have access to that device gains access to that device, then the information is protected. I mean, it may be fairly innocuous. You may have a secretary who brings her smartphone home, and she has access to all your legal data through that smartphone, and her husband's checking his email on there. Now, that's not a situation where you want to be in necessarily. You want to make sure that that data is protected, and you can set up protocols for doing that. And part of this is staff education too. Log out of the system when you're not using it, even if you're on a smartphone, stuff like that. The biggest challenge probably is when a device is lost. So you obviously want to have secure passwords on any devices, so if someone picks it up, they can't automatically just get into it and start perusing your law firm data. You want to make sure that the data that's available and saved on that device is encrypted. And you also want to make sure that you have some remote wipe capabilities. So what I mean by that is somebody finds the device, take a look at it, maybe they want to use it, but you can remotely clear all the information off of that device. So even if they use the device, it looks like a blank device and no information is accessible, no programs are available. So you want to set up what's called a remote wipe, so that you can do that even if you don't have the device. It's basically the self-destruct button without actually destroying anything. You're just wiping all the data. The other tactic, of course, is to go ahead and try to find the lost device. And many products, including iPads and iPhones, for example, have a Find My Device feature. And as long as you've got your location finding on, as long as you've got GPS available, you can get your device back potentially by locating it through GPS. So that's an option as well. But if a device is lost, irrevocably lost, somebody's picked it up, they're trying to do nasty things with your information, make sure you can remotely wipe the device. And the other piece of this as well is if we're talking about using vendors, using platforms to store your data, there's a tactic called pre-encryption that you can use. So all those vendors are going to encrypt your data, certainly, but they're going to be the ones who have the key to that data. So if you want to be ultra sure that you're protecting your stuff, you can encrypt information before it goes up onto a cloud vendor. That way you will hold the encryption key and not them. So you'd have to move through the encryption key that they have applied and also the encryption key that you have applied. And if you don't want to do that on a manual basis, there are products that will allow you to do that as a pass-through. So I know, another cloud vendor, but there are pass-through products that will add a layer of encryption before a document is uploaded to a product like a Dropbox or a Google Drive or something. One of those is Cloud Fogger, if you're interested. There are some others. Let's talk about the cloud. What do you say? Should we talk about the cloud? Let's talk about cloud vendors. I know Abacus Data is sponsoring this podcast, and I appreciate them having me come on. But I will say this is true of pretty much all reputable cloud vendors. There are advantages to using cloud providers for security. And there are some advantages that vendors have that you just don't have as a small law firm. For one, they have money. They're a subscription-based service, so they're able to gain more clients and provide more services and take in more income than you would as your average small firm or mid-sized firm attorney, just because you're capped on the amount of hours you can bill. Vendors are providing products, so they're selling those products to as many customers as they can get, so they have more money to invest in security. They're also using server farms like the one you see pictured here. Those are servers, oftentimes located in a geographically redundant way, so one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, where they've got server farms that are guarded by like armed personnel. These folks have money to spend on IT staffs that many law firms are not willing to spend, and necessarily these are electronic documents, so they're paperless. And I often compare a small firm or a solo law practice to a cloud vendor from the standpoint of security. So if you've got your laptop where you're saving all your information and it's sitting on your desk at your office and it has a moderately secure password on it, well, in all likelihood, that's less secure than saving your data through a cloud vendor at their servers located at some server farm somewhere that's under armed guard. If Amazon's servers fail, we probably all have an issue. So there are some security advantage to using a cloud vendor. You just got to get over the fact that someone else is going to be storing your data. So you have to reasonably vet these companies and trust them to a certain extent. Of course, if you're using cloud vendors, you want to double check what you're doing. And I talked about pre-encryption. I think that's an important tool. You want to make sure that you're encrypting your data ahead of time if that's a concern of yours. You also want to be using, in addition to the default security that any of these services have, you want to make sure that you're using strong passwords, and you want to make sure that you're adding factors of authentication if you can do that. If you can't, that may be a problem. The other thing that the cloud has done to sort of turn things on its head is it's turned upside down the notion of data backup. So it used to be you had local data at devices that you owned, and you had to back that data up to the cloud as a secondary backup. Now you have data that's based in the cloud, and you need to reduce that down to a local backup. So you have that if you don't have access to the cloud. Like I said, Amazon servers are not going to be blown up tomorrow. Let's hope not. But you want a local backup copy of your data just in case you don't have internet access, for example. That's a more likely occurrence if there is a natural disaster, let's say, where your office was located. So in addition to using the backup systems that cloud vendors have, and cloud products have, you also want to be looking at local backup, local physical backup that you have access to just in case. It's always good to develop redundancies in your backup system, and the two major redundancies you want to have is a cloud backup and a local backup. Let's talk about the O'Doyle brothers. All right, we can also talk about data privacy rules. And there are a lot of these. So every state at this point has a data protection rule that you should be aware of. There's one in your state. Massachusetts, state where I'm located, we have the strictest data protection rule in the country. And ours respects encryption. You have to encrypt data that is moving, and that includes data that is saved to a laptop or a tablet, because you can pick that up and move it, and a smartphone as well. By law, you have to have firewalls, malware scanners on your computer, and there are other rules as well. Many states have the reporting rules, which is if there's a data breach, you have to report it to the state, to your clients, and then make certain notifications available. You also are going to be vetting providers by many state rules. So you want to get a handle on what your state rules are. The state laws, I should say. And in Massachusetts and many other states, there's a maintenance and disposition law as well. So how do you maintain data in a secure way? And then how do you get rid of it in a secure way? So do you put all your paper files that you want to get rid of into a garbage bag with like 18 milk bones and throw it out for the neighborhood's dogs to get at? No. You want to use a cross-cut shredder. You want to use a service that'll that'll shred your documents. So there are a number of state laws to be aware of here. There's also the ABA model rules, which now indicate that you should reasonably vet providers and take reasonable steps to secure access to the information that you save for clients. And many states, many jurisdictions are adopting at least some iteration of those model rules. And the other piece here is that while it's not a rule yet, there's a comment to ABA Model Rule 1.1 about lawyers' competency with respect to technology, and that they should be keeping abreast of technological changes in the law. What that all means is that it's your client's file, not yours. It's your obligation to protect that file as the steward of it, and there are certain state and ethical obligations that you need to be adhering to make that happen. Now, there's some issue with respect to circumstances of different firms. So small firms have less money than large firms, which definitely affects the way they can secure data. Now, some firms are holding more sensitive data than others, so the state laws make some exceptions for that. So the key is basically that each firm, each business really, because these are broader than laws that only affect lawyers, have different circumstances, are able to push more money towards security, and sometimes have more sensitive data than others. So there is some play there. If you're a firm of 2 people versus 10 people, that 2-person firm may need to do less to comply with the law than the 10-person firm does. But a lot of this is risk tolerance as well. So what you're looking at is, how comfortable are you, and what ends up being, to your view, a reasonable approach. So there's still an issue with managing paper as well, and I want to briefly address this. So I think most of the consternation over data protection laws reflects electronic files. But with respect to paper files, you still need to keep those secure as well. And basically what you're looking at is lockable, fireproof, waterproof, smoke-proof file cabinets, picking your files up off of the desk at the end of the day, and making sure that you're keeping your files moving, keeping them out of view or out of the way of cleaners or people who are going to be in your office, for example. You want to make sure that you're securing those paper files well by putting them away and locking them, essentially. And then when you get rid of them, that's what you do there. If it's sensitive paper files that you need to get rid of, you want to make sure that you're using that cross-cut shredder, or that you're using a shredding service that will give you a certificate of confidential destruction at the end of the day. This is true of moving away from paper files generally. If you've got a law firm and you want to be more paperless, and you're getting rid of paper files, especially backlogs of paper files, then that's important too. You want to make sure that you do that in a secure manner, even if you're maintaining an electronic file and just getting rid of the paper version of that file. Let's talk about destroying stuff, because that's fun, right? So as I talked about, a lot of the state rules address maintenance of documents, but also destruction of documents. So this is permissive. Again, you're the steward of your client's files. So the question is, have you gotten permission from your clients to destroy their information? If you haven't, you're going to have to seek it. And that can be a pain if you're trying to seek it 7, 8, 10 years down the line after representation has ended. So what I tell people to do is include a clause in their fee agreement that says, hey, after this case closes, we're going to wait 6 years, and then we're going to destroy your file. Speak now or forever hold your peace. And most people will sign off on that. Now, some firms use this from a marketing standpoint. What they will do is they will say, hey, I'll give you an electronic version of your file on an encrypted thumb drive, and by the way, that's got my law firm logo on it. And then they go ahead and destroy whatever files they have. Now, the cloud has sort of inverted this question as well, because you're not necessarily looking at paper files to destroy anymore. What you're looking at is electronic files to destroy, and how do you get rid of those, or do you get rid of those? Electronic storage is much less expensive than physical storage. So I see a lot of attorneys do is destroying the paper files and then keeping the electronic files for forever, just in case something comes up. Now, you don't have to do that, but you can. And if you have those paper files, again, you're destroying them in a confidential way. And if you have those paperless or electronic files, you're destroying them in a confidential manner as well. The state law in Massachusetts, for example, reads that if you're getting rid of electronic data, it has to be unreadable or unreconstructible. So yes, you can put your you can take your hard drive and set it ablaze. You can destroy it with a sledgehammer. You can physically ruin your device that holds that data. But there are also products that will allow you to basically nuke your hard drive in a much less aggressive, much less physical way. One product you could use is called Derek's Nuke and Boot, which will destroy hard drives, and it's a free program that you can use. But the key is getting permission and then destroying those files in a reasonably confidential way. Last thing I wanted to talk about is data backup. So I talked about this a little bit before, how cloud has sort of inverted the question of data backup so that now you're looking for a local backup versus a cloud backup. But the point is that you want to have both. You want to have a redundant backup in the sense that you have a local physical drive that you're backing up to just in case you can't get to your provider or you don't have internet access. But you also want to have a cloud backup as well in case your physical drive or your physical device gets destroyed. So I work in downtown Boston. When we had the Boston Marathon bombings back a few years, I had a lot of attorneys talk to me whose offices were at ground zero. And the people who were able to keep their practices going were those who had multiple backups. So if their laptop was destroyed, they were able to go to a cloud backup provider, buy a new laptop, and download all their stuff, occasionally within the same day. If they didn't have internet access or couldn't get to their cloud providers, well, they had oftentimes a tablet that they would carry around with them that wasn't at the office with them that day that they could use to access their data. So you want to have options, and that's the key. Now, there are some hybrid providers out there as well that will allow you to utilize cloud-based backup and local-based backup in one package. One company, for example, is called Space Monkey, where they'll give you like a terabyte data drive. But in addition to that, they will allow you to back up to their cloud service as well. There may be wisdom to using two companies to do that, just in case one company fails. But basically, if you can have at least these two redundancies, you're doing all right. And you also want to think about the different redundancies that you may have built into your practice. So maybe you save your documents to a laptop, but you also have a Google Drive file or a Microsoft OneDrive file that replicates that. So you may have more iterations or redundancies than you know of, different ways to access your information if one fails. But one of the keys to data backup is making sure that you test it. Oftentimes when you have to get your data back, it's a tense situation. There's just been a natural disaster or some other type of disaster that's occurred to your firm, and you're going to be stressed out. That's not the first time you want to be trying to get your data back from a provider. So delete something that's insignificant and try to get it back in a less pressurized environment, and then you should be able to do it fairly easily when you need to do it. But data backup, I think, is tremendously important. And from a security standpoint, if you're backing up your data and you can get it back, well, that's a method for securing data because you're securing your access to it, even if the physical devices by which you normally access that data are unavailable. So thanks for listening, and thanks to Abacus Data Systems for allowing me to speak here. You should check out some of their products. They have some really good stuff, including Abacus Private Cloud, which is their private secure cloud provider, which is attorney-facing and built for the legal industry.